Also, why to this day 60% of Mormons are against interracial marriage.
Um, yeah. Are 60% of Mormons against interracial marriage, Jacob?
I've scoured the internet and haven't been able to find anything. No Pew surveys, no Gallup surveys, nothing.
I, I'm I'm pretty sure he just made that
Yeah.
up. Real quick, before getting into the video, the majority of people watching our videos are not subscribed. So if you could just check the subscribe button, that would really help us out. Subscribing is free and it just recommends our future videos to you, which is only about one a week. So thanks. Okay, so all right, well, Jacob, I shared this video with you just a couple weeks ago, talking about this guy makes some claims related to Mormons and how they are apparently or allegedly overrepresented by organizations like the FBI and CIA, as well as he makes a variety of other claims that are interesting to say the least. We'll take a look at those when they pop up, but yeah, considering that this is kind of your expertise here, where you study quite a bit of Mormonism and mental health and crime and all the topics related to that, I think this would be a good one to react to and go from there. So, you have any thoughts before we let him speak?
Long story short, what this guy says may be true. There is no direct evidence that we are overrepresented in federal organizations like the FBI or CIA. There is some indirect evidence that suggests we might be. However, the reasons for that are far less sinister than the reasons he gives. So, yeah, we'll go over more of that in detail.
Awesome. All right. Well, we will let him speak here.
Did you know that Mormons are some of the most sought after recruits for the FBI and CIA?
So that's super true. Not only are Mormons overrepresented in the three-letter organizations like the FBI and the CIA, but they are also a target to be recruited for them. That's the ideal candidate is a Mormon.
Okay. So, right off the bat, that's kind of his main point, that Mormons are not only overrepresented, but they are the ideal candidate and they are targeted by the FBI and CIA. And I read the Mormon article on this, and from what I understand, there was the only data that we have that indicates that there's any credibility to this claim is that there was a CIA administrator or recruiter of some kind who made a comment that they have seen some success recruiting out of BYU. You have any thoughts, Dad?
So yeah, they said that. However, like again, that's not data. And the reasons that this administrator or recruiter gives isn't that like for any sinister reason. It's just that like we're responsible, we're mature, we're hardworking. At that age, most kids are out partying and being irresponsible, whereas like we don't drink, we don't do anything irresponsible like that. So because we serve missions, and so that kind of helps us mature a little bit more. There is some data that we're overrepresented in like study abroad programs because we know different languages because we serve missions. And so that might be useful to the CIA. But again, that's not for the sinister reasons that he gives.
Yeah. Yeah, and I imagine that because so many BYU students are bilingual, they speak multiple languages, and they also have experience going on missions and having a companion and having routines and daily routines on a mission. Although he didn't mention anything like that, that's an assumption I make that would make them decent candidates for the FBI, that they've had an experience traveling over, or CIA. They have experience traveling overseas, speaking different languages, and learning how to get along with a partner on the daily basis. So, but yeah, as far as I'm aware, the only thing this recruiter suggests is that it's due to BYU's success in academics and the students' maturity, like you mentioned. So, let's see. Let's see what this creator says about what he thinks the reasons are. Let's let
Yeah.
him make some claims. So I don't know this guy's name, but go ahead.
And it's not because of some weird cabal or some greater theory that the LDS Church is controlling the government. The answer is simultaneously more sinister, but also a lot more simple. The fact is that the Mormon faith, or the faith of the LDS Church, is one of white nationalism. What Jerusalem is to Muslims, Jews, and Christians all around the world is what the U.S. is to Mormons. They believe that America is the Holy Land.
Okay, so yeah, I don't. You have any? He said the fact is, so he was pretty confident in that. You have any thoughts?
So, like, there's two areas where this could come from. One is our belief about where the Book of Mormon took place, and another about where Zion should be. And if you go by where, like, the theories as to where we believe the Book of Mormon took place, Joseph Smith took a hemispheric view on that, like just North and South America. He believed that's where the Book of Mormon took place, and like there's some that have theorized that it took place only in South America or only in Central America. The only way that you could make this argument is if you hyper-focus on Heartlanders, people who believe that the Book of Mormon took place in the U.S. And they have political reasons for this, because there's a subset of Mormons who believe that the Book of Mormon took place in the U.S. because they believe the U.S. is the promised land. But you can't just say, purely based on our theories about where the Book of Mormon took place, that we're just white nationalists, because many of them include places that aren't the U.S., like Central and South America. When it comes to our beliefs about Zion, we don't believe that Zion is the U.S. We believe that when it comes to like geographical areas that we believe Zion is, it started out in Jackson County, Missouri, and then Nauvoo, and then Utah. And like, if you study the history of our early church, like they hated the U.S. government because of how they were treated. And they wanted to create their own separate little country and separate from the U.S. because they hated them so much. That's how the state of Utah, originally called Deseret, was made. We wanted to be our own separate thing. And so it's definitely not based on white nationalism or that the U.S. is the promised land. We try to create our own little promised lands within the U.S. for sure, but that doesn't make the U.S. our promised land.
Sorry, I lost you there for a second, Jacob. The last thing I heard was they wanted to create their own separate little country. Do you have anything you wanted to add on top of that?
Yeah, so basically what I was saying was that they wanted to create their own separate little country within the United States, but they definitely didn't see the United States itself as the promised land. Like, this guy's attacking a straw man.
Yeah, there's no Latter-day Saint belief that we view the United States of America as somehow a holy land. The only thing I could think of, like you mentioned, maybe like some Heartlanders would interpret the Book of Mormon that way, but I think that is highly problematic to view it. To interpret it that way, in references to like that the references to the land in the Book of Mormon have to mean the border continental United States. Yeah. When in reality, ancient world, they just spoke like land is in just kind of your general area, what you can see around you. But they might also say, it could also go the route of like, we're going to build a new Jerusalem on the American continent. But that doesn't mean the American continent is somehow holy. We just believe that there's going to be at least traditional Latter-day Saints would believe that there's going to be a holy city built on the American continent. It has nothing to do with the American continent being holy, just that there would be another holy city here. But yeah, nowhere in Latter-day Saint beliefs or doctrine is there a suggestion that the United States as a country as we understand it today is somehow a holy land. That's just, he just literally made that up.
Yeah, if you want to see what the early church leaders thought of the U.S. government and the U.S. as a country, read the Council of 50 Minutes. Like, yeah. I read several essays on it, and they say a bunch of damning things about the U.S. government and the country as a whole. Like, there's a reason why they kept the Council of 50 Minutes a secret, was because some of the stuff they said would be considered treasonous, and the church didn't release those until 2016, I believe. They didn't want people to see that until later when everything was died down and Mormons weren't considered like, we're still kind of marginalized and viewed negatively, but not to where we'd be driven from our homes and persecuted. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I'm with you. And like in LDS belief, we believe, and I think you touched on a little bit, that like Zion, the Holy Land, is really anywhere where the saints are. It's been interpreted different ways. Like you mentioned, the early saints, it was like the Midwest. Pioneers, it was Utah. Ultimately, today as a church, we believe that Zion is wherever the saints are. And we can create Zion in any community around the world. From Guatemala to Africa to Utah to Britain, wherever the saints are willing to build a God-driven community is where a Holy Land or Zion is.
Correct.
So,
and even when we did put geographical borders behind it, it wasn't the United States. It was a specific place within the United States that we wanted to create separately from the United States because we didn't like the United States. And leaders have they've idealized the founding of the nation and the Constitution itself, but they were very critical of the country itself for not living up to those ideals. And so, there's nothing white nationalist about that at all.
Yeah, I'm with you. So let's let our friend here keep chatting away, and we'll see what else he has to say.
And that its inception of Israelites in a submarine after Jesus was resurrected.
Okay, I don't even know what that was supposed to be. It's inception of Israelites in a submarine. As like a vague reference to like the Jaredites in combination with Nephi, his group. I don't know what he's talking about.
He's probably
there.
referring to the barges, but the thing is with the Jaredites, it says nothing about whiteness or blackness with them specifically. Never says that anyone is cursed with what appears to be dark skin. That's the Nephites and Lamanites specifically, and there's good reason to believe that is more metaphorical rather than literal, like white skin, dark skin.
Yeah, we'll get into that in just a sec. But yeah, this idea that the inception of America is Israelites in a submarine is not. That's just nonsense. I don't know what he's talking about there. So it's a vague reference to the Jaredites and the barges, but the barges weren't submarines, and we'll let him keep going. I don't know what he's saying.
White Israelites, by the way. This is a whole other tangent, but basically your skin color corresponds to how evil your ancestors were. So if you were black or Native American, better luck next time having better ancestors, I guess.
Okay, so that's a pretty loaded. He brings up common and pretty loaded criticism of the referencing the past belief, or referencing the idea in the Book of Mormon that the skin of blackness was a racial curse that God placed upon the Lamanites, and the people, their seed is less righteous because of that marking on the skin, which is the face value interpretation, and maybe even a reference to some ideas in Brigham Young about the curse of Cain, and some past racist ideas in LDS doctrine. So, you have any thoughts before I dive in?
Yeah. So, do you follow Benjamin Park on TikTok?
Yeah, I follow him. I watch probably almost every one of his videos.
Yeah. So he said something interesting. He believes that the Book of Mormon is like, I believe, purely just a 19th century product. However, he made an interesting video where he said that the Book of Mormon isn't totally racist, even if you take a 19th century view, because in Joseph Smith's time, the belief was that race was immutable. It was fixed, something you couldn't change. It was biological. Whereas the Book of Mormon was teaching that skin color or race could change depending on your behavior, whether you were righteous or not. And so it challenges the current idea of Joseph Smith's time that race was something biological and fixed. Personally, I think that the fact that it teaches that is evidence that it's referring to something other than skin color, and that it's more metaphorical. But he comes from a paradigm where it can only be a 19th century product. I don't think he accepts the possibility of the supernatural or that it could be of ancient Semitic origin. But I just thought that was interesting coming from someone like him, that the Book of Mormon isn't completely racist because it challenged the racist ideas of Joseph Smith's day.
Yeah, and even if we take, like, let's say the Book of Mormon is a 19th century creation, the suggestion that it's referencing, like, a lot of people will say, the American Indians just doesn't hold up, because it doesn't. The reference to their skin would be red, not black, as it's talked about in the Book of Mormon. But I agree with you that if we take the Book of Mormon as an ancient document, I think the case to make that the alleged curse of being, like, racial, I don't think is a strong one. David Snell on Faith and Belief, Saints Unscripted, recently did a really good video on the skin of blackness curse, basically showing that, like, and I view it this way, that the curse was I view it as a reflection of Nephi, and his beliefs and ideas in ancient Near East rhetoric and language. So when his family was in Jerusalem, they had a document. Can't remember exactly what it was called. The Secession Treaty of Esarhaddon, however you say that, which talks about the gods cursing the skin, the skin of your women, the skin of your children, as black, or as pitch, as crude oil. And that was a document that was on display in Jerusalem when Nephi's family was there. But the suggestion that document in that time was referring to your skin, the black skin, as race, is completely anachronistic, because that entire concept did not exist in that context. And so, looking at that document in context, it was a reference to something like spiritual like spiritual death or physical death or being ill or sick. And so I think when Nephi uses the exact same Near Eastern rhetoric and imagery when he comes to the New World and he sees his brothers go and what I think is going and mixing in with the pre-existing populations and becoming very wicked with them, and abandoning the promise that God gave them, that God would preserve the land for them if they hearkened to his commandments and followed him, and that the brothers, as soon as they get to the New World, they abandon that promise and go and mix in with the other populations. I think Nephi uses the exact same imagery that was on display in his time period growing up in Jerusalem, to describe his brother's behavior. And that's where I think we see the rhetoric of skin of blackness come from. So if I had to make it simple, I would say it's more of a reference to spiritual countenance and death than it would be to anything racial. But those are my thoughts. Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, and the very fact that that the Book of Mormon teaches that skin color can change shows that it's being used more as a proxy for right or wrong behavior rather than a literal, skin color. Yeah,
and there's been quite a bit of theories that have come out on, like, what the skin of blackness actually is referencing in the Book of Mormon. None of them are perfect, like the idea that it was a tattoo, body paint, clothing, or what David Snell promotes as a skin condition. I think the lazy reading is just saying, no, the book is racist, as it's clearly claiming that God is changing their skin color because they were bad. And while I think that's a reading that can be justified at face value, I don't think when you engage the Book of Mormon critically and at depth, it really supports that interpretation at all. And ultimately, I think the Book of Mormon, there's the interpreter article that really goes into this.
Yeah.
That the Book of Mormon is unanimous and overwhelming in its message of anti-discrimination and inclusivity. So, with the goal of all people becoming one in Christ. So,
yeah, and the crowning moment of the Book of Mormon is in 4th Nephi, where there were no manner of ites, and that there were no divisions among them. That's a major message. And there's actually a Native American. He was a Shoshone. His name was Frank Timbimbano or something. He joined the church, like, I think in the Brigham Young, John Taylor days. He served a mission in Canada, and the parts of the Book of Mormon that he taught, he was teaching other Native Americans in Canada. The part that he liked to emphasize was that part in 4th Nephi, where it said that there were no manner of ites, and that we can all become one, and there are no divisions among us. So coming from a Native American man, that's what he resonated with from the Book of Mormon. And maybe we can link that interpreter article and also that video by David Snell in the show notes after this. But
I'll do that.
That interpreter article also shows that the condemnatory language that the Book of Mormon uses towards the Lamanites are also used towards the Nephites, but they're more frequently used towards the Nephites. Like, what was it? Lowly and loathsome, dark. All of those like derogatory adjectives that are used for the Nephites are used for the Lamanites, but more so for the Nephites. Like he goes over the data and all the words that are being used. And so the Book of Mormon obviously doesn't see the Lamanites as worse than the Nephites. In fact, it holds the Nephites to a higher standard because they started out good, and so they should know better. And so the Book of Mormon, like the connection between skin color, like literal skin color and right behavior isn't strong, and it's more of a proxy for right behavior.
Yeah, I'm with you. So if I could just summarize my position on the skin color, skin of blackness in the Book of Mormon, it would be that Nephi's family, they grew up when a treaty was on display that said if you abandon your promise with God, God's going to curse your skin and your family's skin as black, or as pitch as crude oil. And that we know that race didn't exist in this context, so that's not a reference to race as we understand it today. And then we see that as soon as Nephi's family is leaving Jerusalem, God frequently promises them, you obey the commandments, you're going to prosper in the land. You disobey, you're going to be cut off from the presence of the Lord. Cut off from the presence of the Lord equals spiritual death, which is a way that they would describe someone's skin as becoming black as in spiritually dead. So Nephi's family, they get to the New World. Laman and Lemuel immediately break that covenant from God that they would be preserved in the land. They go and intermix with the pre-existing populations, become very wicked, and Nephi uses the exact same imagery and rhetoric to describe that situation as was on display in Jerusalem where he grew up. So there's just another quick summary of that. I don't think it's a stretch to interpret it that way. A lot of critics will say it is, but I think it's pretty considering taking the text holistically and engaging with the Near East data. I think that's a pretty reasonable interpretation of it.
Yeah, and rather than just cherry picking a few passages that support your position, which both sides do, we can look at that interpreter article, which just looks at the Book of Mormon from a bird's eye view, like just breaks down all the data on the phrases that are being used, and we see that the overall message of the Book of Mormon is one of non-discrimination and inclusivity, and being welcoming and not condemnatory towards people that are different from you. We can. So I want to add something. Like we talk about the Book of Mormon. However, there's a good article that was published in BYU Studies concerning the teachings of church leaders in regards to race. Dan Peterson actually posted this in one of his blog posts. It's by Michael Goodman and Daniel Frost, and it's entitled "Constancy Amid Change: Latter-day Saint Discourse on Gender and Sexuality." It's primarily about gender and sexuality, but they also have a part on race. And I'm just going to read a part of it. They say, a search of General Conference addresses from 1851 to 2020 for the words race, races, racial, racism, black, Negro, Caucasian, and skin, which included almost 2,200 references, failed to produce a single direct reference to maintaining white or any other racial purity. There were problematic race-based statements in General Conference that showed the speaker did not believe in the equality of different races. However, none of the General Conference statements explicitly advocated for maintaining white or any kind of racial purity. Knowing of the several explicitly racist statements by early church leaders, some of which are listed in Tabernacles of Clay, we expected to find many such statements in the more than 2,000 references in General Conference since 1851. We were surprised at the results. Again, were a few statements that would be justifiably considered racist by most people today. However, by a margin of well over 20-1, the majority of statements from General Conference regarding race affirmed the dignity and worth of all people and called upon church members to do better in their attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors towards all races. Some of these statements explicitly condemned the belief in white racial superiority. One example is David O. McKay, who condemned those in the world who are arrogating themselves racial superiority. It might be tempting to believe that the teachings of the latter half of the 20th century created this largely non-racist teaching record. But that is not what the actual search found. Statements about racial equality and human dignity were spread throughout the 19th, 20th, and 21st centuries. It is also true that the few problematic statements were predominantly from the 19th century. This comprehensive search of every talk and general conference shows the complex nature of racial understanding even in the early days of the church. Would it be accurate to state that church leaders held no racist beliefs because of the overwhelming majority of their statements about race and general conference were remarkably egalitarian? No, we have sufficient counterexamples to disprove that view. Would it be accurate to claim that the church leaders believed and regularly taught white supremacy and the need to maintain white racial superiority, since the historical record shows that a few did? No, such a claim is not supported by the overall record. So that was a bit long, but like it just it's a good summary of their research. Like they searched like 2,200 references in General Conference from 1851 to 2020, and the overall message included some racist remarks, but the overall message was one of being welcoming and not supporting white supremacy or white nationalism.
Yeah, that's fascinating. It's fascinating they didn't find any, as long as I heard that right, they didn't find any connection between the racist statements that we shouldn't excuse or justify, but the racist statements and those being connected to an idea of like preserving a race like purity.
Right. Yeah.
Which is I would assume that would have been all over the place, but that's fascinating that they didn't find any of those references.
Yeah,
there.
so like when critics argue that the church is racist, that you could find instances where church leaders said obviously racist things. However, the only thing you can argue is that the church didn't live up to what a true church, like the only God's true church should be. Like they didn't live up to that ideal. However, like if we're comparing them to other organizations, to the rest of the United States, when you look at that search, like it shows that they weren't exceptionally racist by any means.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's. I need to read that. I haven't read that article yet. That sounds like a fascinating.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's let our friend here keep going and let's see.
It's also why to this day 60% of Mormons are against interracial marriage.
Yeah. Are 60% of Mormons against interracial marriage, Jacob?
I've scoured the internet and haven't been able to find anything. No Pew surveys, no Gallup surveys, nothing.
I'm pretty sure he just made that.
Yeah.
That could maybe be like a justifiable statistic 80 years ago. That probably could be more an accurate reflection of what Mormons believed, but today that he quite literally just made that up. I don't even know where that comes from.
Like the only evidence like that you could possibly point to is that in like our handbook the church like made a recommendation to only marry within your own race. And like I wish they didn't do that because it sounds really bad now, but like
yeah, it was terrible.
Like from their perspective, I think they were just using race as kind of a proxy for culture. And yeah, it is harder when you marry someone of a different culture than you, especially one that's fundamentally different. I've heard like that when some people from the United States marry someone from like the Polynesian Islands, there are just some fundamental differences that just create conflicts. And so like that, I can see why they would recommend it for that reason. However, they should have just said culture and not race. Like,
yeah. How long ago was that in the handbook?
It was like back in the 90s. I'm not quite sure like when it was taken out, but
yeah, it's definitely like the idea that today, like when he made this TikTok, that 60% of Mormons are against interracial marriage. That's complete and total nonsense. He doesn't have a shred of evidence to justify that.
Yeah, and even if you can find like the church saying that in the handbook, like that doesn't mean that members like internalized that. and that they
No.
fundamentally believed that. I don't think the church was constantly trying to reinforce this in their members. Like, you just have to, like, there's one little passage in the handbook which is regrettable, but that's not evidence that Mormons had that attitude. And being in an interracial marriage myself, I can say that growing up, I never heard that, ever. And then after my grandma died, my grandpa married a lady from Guatemala, and he was in the church his whole life. And to my knowledge, he never heard that. So yeah, if you like just scour the handbook for that one little phrase, you can find it. But I don't think that attitude is widespread.
Yeah. And again, that hasn't, at least like 20 years, 30 years since anything like that has been anything remotely resembling church policy. Like, this guy's trying to talk about Mormons today, and he couldn't be further off base from, just making stuff up. You know how TikTok is. So, all right, well, let's let him keep going.
Anyway, that tangent aside, they make great agents because they will never, ever question an order that comes from the U.S. government, because they think its founding is literally just. It's proper. It is holy. It means that they think that America's government in its current existence is in itself a holy institution, whether they realize it or not, because they are taught that the goal of America is the goal of the Mormon Church.
Okay. All right. So, do we believe that we will never question an order? So he's saying that we will never question an order from the U.S. government because we believe that America in its inception is holy and just. And I can't help but think that he has not engaged with Mormon history in the slightest.
Nope.
I don't know. What do you think?
You had early Mormon leaders who were willing to go to prison rather than stop practicing polygamy. And that was you had federal officials like trying to hunt down Mormon leaders because they were practicing polygamy. Like, read John Titter's biography. The guy was in hiding during the last few years of his life, and they had to move him from house to house, different locations, because you had law enforcement officers. The Mormons called them skunks that were tasked with finding Mormon leaders, bringing them to the courts, and throwing them in prison for practicing polygamy.
Yeah, and haven't we wanted to start our own country multiple times throughout LDS history? Because we were so pissed off at the U.S. government that we were like, we're going to start we went to Utah to leave the U.S. government, to get the freak away from the U.S. government. The U.S. government wanted to kill us. They wanted, what is going on?
The only evidence you can find is that church leaders, recent and in the early church, have idealized the American founding, the ideals, not how it has been put in practice. Because even when church leaders were talking crap about the U.S. government and America as a whole, they still talked about how great the ideals of the American founding were in the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence. However, Joseph Smith did have a lot of bad things to say about republicanism and democracy, because the Mormons were kicked out of several areas, like in Missouri and Nauvoo, because of democracy. The people around them just didn't want them there, and so they could just kick them out without any consequences. And so, but you can find the most radical left-wing people out there who will idealize the American founding and say that the ideals were good, but that in practice not so great. You can't argue that those people are white nationalists.
Yeah.
You'll find people of any political stripe that will say, the ideals of the American founding were great, but in practice, terrible.
Yeah. Yeah, this idea that we'll never question the U.S. government it's just stupid. This guy just like the last thing, he's literally just making it up. I don't even know if millions of people watching this guy's video walk away entirely ill-informed and stupider. You can't watch this guy's video and become any more intelligent when he's spewing stuff like this. No, literally, we have fought with the U.S. government throughout the entire history of the church, and will probably continue to fight the U.S. government in the future. I don't see any reason why that wouldn't be the case 20 years from now.
Yeah, we just got fined by the U.S. government for not complying with like
we were hiding our money from the U.S. government. So.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. And
yeah, it's like we have the belief that like we should obey and honor the law, which is a good belief, but that by no means does that say that we believe that the government is holy and just in its practices. We just believe in being good citizens wherever we live around the world.
Yeah, in extreme cases, you got people like Ammon Bundy and the Lafferty brothers, who were very much influenced by anti-government sentiments, and then you have, like, during COVID, a significant percentage of members who didn't want to comply with the vaccine and mask mandates. And so, like, there's, like, the teaching in the Book of Mormon about secret combinations, and some members take that to an extreme and fall into these conspiracy theories about how the U.S. government isn't to be trusted in anything. And they hate the U.S. government. That's why there's a significant libertarian movement within Mormonism, especially among young men. So, yeah, you can't definitively argue that we have just this unflinching loyalty to the U.S. government. Maybe to American ideals in the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, but not to the U.S. government.
Yeah, just making stuff up. That's all that is. All right, well, let's let him continue here.
And I'm not saying Joseph Smith intended this. I think he was a lot more simple-minded. He was just a con man. He wanted a lot of influence, a lot of money, and a lot of 14-year-olds to marry.
Okay, just real quick. I mean, this is just this little side brush here he made here. He got sealed to one 14-year-old. Well, maybe two, debating on if Nancy Winchester, depending on if we even place that as a plural marriage, and then exactly when we would place it. But there's some ambiguity in the documentation there. Pretty much one definitive. He was sealed to one definitive 14-year-old Helen Mar Kimball. I'm not in the practice of justifying or excusing this, but it is important to understand a little bit of context surrounding it. It was non-sexual. As far as research has gone, it was non-sexual. It was a way to bind Helen Mar Kimball's family to the Smith family, because her father, Heber C. Kimball, wanted to be a united family with Joseph in the afterlife, so he had Helen Mar Kimball get sealed to Joseph, so their families would be connected in the LDS sealing. I'm not in the business of excusing it. I think Joseph getting sealed to Helen was wrong, and I think it was weird, and I don't think it should have happened. In a lot of ways, I think it was disturbing. But if we are going to have a conversation about it, I think it's important to make sure we understand some of the context so we can have an appropriate conversation.
Right.
And then this guy also suggests that Joseph was motivated by pursuit of women. He was just a lowly con man who was motivated by pursuing women. That's why he created religion. The con man reference, again, we already talked about that in the last episode. Doesn't hold any weight. The pursuit of women, this could be a whole episode, but I think research indicates that Joseph did not pursue polygamy out of lust. At least at first. You could probably make an argument later on, but at least at first it doesn't seem he was pursuing it out of lust. A lot of, maybe with the Fanny Alger situation you could argue that, but Nauvoo polygamy specifically, I think it's pretty clear that he was trying to find a way to apply the Old Testament principle of polygamy in a way that didn't require sexual relations. And just a lot of his behavior about the polygamy, living in marrying pregnant women, living in separate houses, only getting sealings and not marriages, just indicates to me that this wasn't at least in the early Nauvoo, wasn't sexually motivated. So, what do you think?
I think the data indicates that he just believed he was sincerely restoring. He sincerely believed that he was restoring an ancient practice that God wanted him to restore. And that's the primary reason why he was practicing polygamy. That's what the data indicates. And regarding the marriage of 14-year-olds, like, I'm glad that the age laws, the age laws have changed as to when young women can get married. I'm glad that our culture has changed. However, like, you got to look at the historical context, and just young girls getting married in those days, even to men much older than them, wasn't considered taboo like it is today. And anyone that wants to challenge me on this, read the book American Child Bride. It's by a non-LDS historian, and she's not trying to be an apologist for child marriage or anything. She just tries to describe how people during that time viewed child marriage, the marriage of minors to older men. Yeah. And just trying to understand the historical context, especially in the Deep South and on the frontier, like that wasn't considered taboo. And the people who did oppose it were feminists from living in the Northeast. They tend to be very privileged. The reasons why they opposed it aren't the same reasons why people oppose it now. So that's a good book that I'd refer to anyone. Again, I'm not trying to be an apologist for the practice today. Just trying to understand people's perspective back then, why they would do it, and not trying to be condemnatory, not just towards the Mormons, but toward anyone who did that.
Yeah. And again, so we're perfectly clear, just because we add context or a little bit of historical context to these situations doesn't mean that we agree with or endorse a variety of how Joseph Smith or other Latter-day Saints practice polygamy. For again, I don't agree with Joseph marrying Helen Mar Kimball. I don't agree with how he handled the Fanny Alger situation. I don't agree with how he handled half of this plural marriages or how it came about later on. But it is important, if we're going to have conversations about plural marriage and make accusations about it, to at least have conversations in mature context. And there's nothing wrong with adding context to those conversations so they can be more informed and mature. Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah. Again, I don't think the suggestion this guy makes that Joseph was just pursuing women over lustful sexual desires, I don't think that holds much weight in the historical record. No. But that probably, again, deserves its own episode in the future.
Yeah, right.
We need Don Bradley or someone for that one. Brian Hells. All right, let's let our friend keep going.
But the LDS Church today definitely is aware of its role, and it definitely leans into it, and that's why it's so wealthy, 5 times the amount of the Vatican. And it's why they're one of the largest private landowners, not just in the U.S., but on Earth. And it's why Mormons alone spend so much time on missions compared to other Christians, because they're not just trying to convert them, they're converting them and leading them to America, the promised land.
Okay. This is nonsense.
Yeah.
Because this is complete and total nonsense. Our handbook, as of today, our handbook literally says that we encourage people to stay where they are. So the suggestion that we're sending out missionaries to go and convert people and bring them to America is complete buffoon talk. He's just talking nonsense. Yeah. You have any thoughts?
I remember as a missionary in the White Handbook, it specifically says not to try and, like, if you have a companion or someone that you're teaching, don't try and sponsor them to come and get an education or move to the U.S., because that just creates a whole bunch of ethical problems. Try and help them where they are. There are lots of members who join the church and then they move to Utah because they want to go to BYU, where there's a lot more people that think like them. But the church doesn't encourage that. They haven't encouraged that for a very long time. It was only in the early days of the church that we encouraged people to move to the United States. But it wasn't the United States. It was to Utah specifically.
Yeah. And, like, he references that we're buying up a bunch of land. Yeah, we're buying a bunch of farmland. And probably because the church wants to be able to feed the membership if the world ever goes bad. So they have a bunch of farmland in preparation for the calamities of the second coming.
Also, there's like some inherent contradictions to what he's saying. He says that we believe in white nationalism. White nationalists don't like immigration. Like, especially immigration of people with brown skin. And so if he's arguing that we're white nationalists, but simultaneously we're trying to get people to convert and move to the U.S., like, that's not what white nationalists do. They don't try and get people from Africa and South America to convert and move to the U.S. Like, we would be anti-immigration.
Yeah. This video is so stupidly shallow. I can't. This is the worst video yet that we've done. I can't even grasp it.
Yeah, it's the one that's gotten the most traction too out of all the ones we've reacted to.
Yeah.
So
it's okay.
One specific thing I want to go over. So when I was growing up in Arizona, I think this was like 2008, 2009. The Governor Jan Brewer of Arizona, she signed a bill, an immigration bill, that was really harsh on immigration. Like, some states, they just let the federal government deal with immigration. But others, like Arizona, decided that they were going to go out of their way to have like local and state law enforcement to help the federal government in trying to catch illegal aliens and deport them. And there were like a lot of things in the law that qualified as like racial profiling. It was a very unethical law. At the same time, Utah passed a law which basically said that we're just going to let the federal government handle the capture of illegal aliens and the deportation. If they commit crimes that break our laws in the Utah law book, we'll prosecute them and put them in prison. Other than that, we don't want to break up families. And the church had a lot of influence in the formation of that law. They went out of their way to lobby for that law. And their justification for it was that we don't want to break up families. So if you ever want to say that the church is like white nationalist, just look at their attitude towards immigration. There's evidence that serving missions makes missionaries have more positive attitudes towards immigration. Like, yeah, just all the evidence points towards us not being white nationalists and open to immigration ever since the beginning of our church.
Yeah, I'm with you 100% there. We can let this guy finish. He doesn't really say anything LDS related, but we can at least let him finish his thoughts, and then we can wrap up. All right, the end.
The end. Oh, okay.
Thank you for your the end. He doesn't really add anything new there. No, we don't. We're not bringing people to America. No, we don't think America is somehow this holy land that we cannot disagree with. In fact, our church history is we fight with America throughout the entirety of the church. No, there's no data that indicates that we're directly targeted by the FBI or CIA or overrepresented outside of very small statements by recruiters. No, we don't believe that America, as it's understood today, is somehow a holy land similar to Jerusalem. So, and no, not 60% of Mormons are against interracial marriage. And no, Joseph Smith wasn't a con man, and no, he didn't just want a bunch of 14-year-olds. Just the whole video is no.
Yeah, it's just absolute bogus.
This guy represents everything I hate about TikTok. There's a lot of things I like about TikTok, but the fact is, I can go on TikTok and I can make up stuff, and my video can get 1 million views, and nobody will say anything. You can literally just make stuff up, talk confident, and people walk away just taking it all in and not even thinking twice about it. And it is very, very sad to see.
Yeah, I wonder what this guy's connection to the church is, or if he just Googled a few stuff and thought he was informed.
Doesn't even seem like he Googled it, because you can't even find this stuff on Google. Yeah. It's like he heard it in some back alley conversation, and he's like, "Oh, suddenly I'm an expert on Mormonism." Like, I don't know. It drives me crazy, though. No. You have any last thoughts?
No, I think I've said everything that I want to say.
Yeah, me too. Remember, when you're watching viral clips of religions or information on the internet, always good to double check and fact check things, or else you could end up believing lunatics like this guy. So, there you go. And with that, thank you guys for watching, and we will see you next time.